In today's episode, I chat with the lovely Charlotte. Charlotte is a mum to one girl, and she takes us through her home birth story. As a first-time mum, Charlotte was pretty sure that she wanted to have a home birth, and it might have been due to the fact that her mum had a home birth for her. In this episode, Charlotte tells us that initially when she told a GP that she wanted to have a home birth, she was told by that GP that it would be dangerous for her to have one, and she was almost discouraged, which made Charlotte even more determined to have a home birth in the end. So then she found a beautiful private midwife and they started their journey. However, as we know, birth doesn't always go according to plan, and in Charlotte's case, when her labor started, she was at home and she was laboring. But after more than a few hours and her midwife checking her, she was met with a decision to either transfer to hospital for non-urgent reason other than what seemed to be a slow labor, or stay at home and continue to labor. And in this case, Charlotte tells us that she felt transferring was the best decision, and one thing that she didn't want was to transfer in a state of emergency. So for Charlotte, her labor was actually quite long. It ended up being 46 hours, and she fought getting an epidural because that was her plan, to try and have a physiological birth, and that was what her partner was on board with as well. And she takes us through what it was like for her, but also for her partner, to change that decision and actually get an epidural. Charlotte later learned that her daughter was posterior, and that was why her labor was relatively slow. What this episode really shows us is that trusting your body and trusting your instinct is everything in birth. And in Charlotte's case, she fought really hard for almost 2 days to have the physiological birth she wanted, and she did so well to be able to birth her daughter vaginally after a 46-hour labor. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. You are listening to Cuppa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia, exercise physiologist and doula. And every week I chat with a mum or mum-to-be about all things pregnancy, birth, and parenting. The stories you will hear in this podcast are real and sometimes raw, but they are all told without any taboo. So grab yourself a cuppa, put your earphones in, relax, and enjoy this episode. Hi, Charlotte. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Do you want to start by introducing yourself, telling the listeners where you're living, telling the listeners your name to start with, where you're living and who's in your family?
Yes, my name is Charlotte. I'm on the northwest coast of Tasmania, so sort of near Devonport. It's a lovely little beachside town. I have quite a few animals in my family, a baby and my husband. So my husband's name is Dylan. Our baby girl Isla is 7 months. We've got 3 brand new chickens and a dog called Pink.
Wow. So you have a zoo.
We have a little zoo.
That's cool. How's Isla with the chickens? Is she like wanting to grab them or something?
She hasn't gotten too close to them yet, but she's really curious. But our dog is quite obsessed with the chickens as well. Mm-hmm. Everyone's obsessed with each other, actually. The dog really likes Isla and she loves him, and they just want to lick each other, and it's chaos.
That sounds so funny.
Yeah, it's really cute.
So Isla's not scared of the chickens? Because, they can be a bit, I don't want to say scary, but she's 7 months and they're probably quite big and a bit noisy.
Really. They haven't, they've always had a barrier between them. So, I think we'll see as she gets older, and I'm sure she's going to get a bit grabby with them, and who knows, I had a chicken incident when I was little. One of them scratched my eye, so I hope she's not afraid of chickens like I am.
Gosh, I've been pecked on the head by a chicken, right? And that was so painful. And especially because, like, so the chicken ended up on my head. I don't even remember how. And I'm trying to get it off, right? And so the chicken's obviously really scared. And I'm really scared. And we're both, like, panicking. And I'm, like, running around trying to, like, kick this chicken off. And obviously it's, like, really, like, hanging on to me.
They are powerful creatures.
Yes, and I'm like, ah, and you know, I'm like 8, so I mean, I'm like, ah, like running around like a headless chicken, for like a bit of words, and yeah, I've got this chicken on my head, which is also, because I've got curly hair, which is also stuck in my hair too.
Oh, it can grab
you know, like
yeah,
nothing was right that day. Yeah. Anyway, outside of chicken story, we're not here for chicken story today. We're here for a much more interesting story, which is your story of motherhood. So did you always want to be a mom, Charlotte?
I think so. I think I always expected that I would one day.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were a bit older when they had me, so I think Mum was about 38, and so in my mind I kind of had it in my head that you live your life, you do all the things you want to do, and then you have kids.
Yep.
And so when I met my husband, we were chatting and he said, oh, I'd really like kids before I'm 30, and at the time I was like, what, that's insane, no way. But then I hit 27, 28, and I don't know if it's biology or what, but I was like, yes, I desperately want a baby. So yeah, we got married, and then a month or so later we started trying for Isla. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Wow. That would have been a bit of a conversation there, where obviously you were brought up with parents that were older, and as you said, they did what they wanted and then they had children, so that's what you know. And then your husband's like, oh, I want to have kids when I'm like before 30. And you're like, oh,
yeah,
wait, we're on a different timeline right now.
Yeah, well, I just thought it was, I don't know, I just took it as a big joke. I was like, that's crazy. And I didn't feel kind of ready, I guess, at that point. Or it just felt like a long way off. And I think this sounds a bit corny, but I wouldn't have been ready with anyone else. But, you know, I wanted to have babies with him. He's the best. And and I was excited about that.
Nice. So did you conceive Isla fairly quickly?
It took about 5 months, which is quick looking back, but at the time it felt like a long time. Every single month you're kind of waiting, and then your period comes, and I was quite emotional in those cycles. And it did make the conception process at times a bit not that fun, because it felt like this thing that I wanted so badly, and every time it didn't happen I got really disappointed. Which is a shame, but I think I'm lucky compared to a lot of other women who have to try for years, and we had a natural conception in the end. So that's right. And it's exactly like you said, it's when you want a baby, you obviously want the baby now. You don't want to wait 5 months, and it's so disheartening when you get your period every time and you just go, it didn't work. And it, obviously in hindsight you're like, well, it only took 5 months, but while you're in it, it's taking a long time. Yeah, and you're kind of told your whole life as a woman that until you're kind of at an appropriate age to not get pregnant, and then it's the worst thing ever, and it happens so easily, and you have to be so careful, and then as soon as you're ready, you're like, I should be immediately pregnant. This is what they warned me about in school. But exactly. It took a bit longer.
And I think that's why I've heard it a lot from other women who said, I thought I was going to have trouble to conceive, because for many years either they've been on birth control for 15 plus years, or they're like, well, I've never fallen pregnant by doing, for example, the pull-out method or whatever other contraception they're using. So they're like, oh, there's probably something wrong with me. I probably can't have children. And then when they actually do try, it works usually within a reasonable time frame. I think the average time for, two healthy, 30-ish years old to conceive is about 10 months. 10 to 12, I think, is pretty average. So, I mean, but we're not told that. And, when it's taking you 10 months to conceive, you're like, okay, there's something wrong with me for sure.
We went to, I went to an obstetrician in Hobart when we lived down there before we were planning to start trying, just to, I don't know, really find out if there was anything I needed to do beforehand. And he did a few blood tests, and he said, come back in a year if you've not got pregnant after a year. That eased my mind a bit.
Yeah. And that's usually the thing. The medical professionals, they don't intervene until it's been a year, unless you've got some, medical history. You've got maybe some conditions that could impact on your fertility. They usually don't intervene until then. So did the obstetrician recommend you to do anything prior to conception, or was everything all good?
He took a few blood tests and just to check that my vaccines were up to date, and so I had to get, I think, a rubella or something like that. But otherwise, no. And I have a condition called Charcot-Marie-Tooth. It's a peripheral neuropathy. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, I haven't.
It's essentially, it manifests as weak hands and feet and rolling my ankles a lot. Muscular dystrophy, I think. So I have to work quite hard to keep my muscles strong in my periphery. And so I wanted to ask him if, pregnancy had any impact on that, which he didn't think it did. But he said, he's a very medical guy, obviously, and he said, you might need a forceps birth, or, you might get tired, so we might have to do an epidural. And at the time I'd done no birth research, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. But looking back, I was like, gosh, that's such an intense thing to say straight up.
Yeah.
To kind of already plan to use instruments without knowing how it was going to go. Anyway, it was fun.
As you said, he's an obstetrician. I guess that's kind of what they do. Well, that's probably generalized, Probably shouldn't say that. It's generalized. But I guess obstetricians, maybe they revert back to using instruments sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
So then you got pregnant with Isla. How did you announce it actually to your husband?
I did the test while he was in the shower. Okay. And I had actually a few months ago bought like a little onesie, and I was planning to do a cute little, onesie and pregnancy test. And I did the test, and he was in the shower, and I was just so shocked, which is silly because we've been trying. So I just ran into him and told him straight away. And he got out of the shower, and he kind of wasn't surprised. He was like, cool, yeah, that's great. And, he obviously really wanted kids, but I was expecting, I don't know what, like a much bigger surprise. Yeah. But yeah, then I gave him the little onesie that I bought that was down the bottom of the cupboard. So, yeah, and wow. I think I called my parents straight away after that as well, and they all knew as soon as I called them on video chat. So that was sweet.
Nice. Oh, so nice. So had you started to look into birthing options, especially being in Tasmania, you've probably got maybe less birthing options than you would on mainland. So did you kind of know where you could birth and what model of care you wanted? It's true that there is definitely less down here. My mum had 2 home births for me and my brother. Oh, wow. So, and so I guess I just had in my head that I sort of always knew that's what I wanted.
and that was a really normal, safe kind of thing to do. So yeah, as soon as we thought about trying, I looked up who was available in the area, and there's only two ladies who work together up in our area, and there's a few down south. So I kind of kept their website close, and as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I sent them an email. I think I was 6 weeks when I emailed, which was lucky because they're so busy and so in demand, being the only private midwives around. That that was really lucky to get them. And I think maybe even I had felt quite sick before I did the test and just felt run down and tired. And I think I might have even been ready to email them at that point. It was very early.
Wow. Do you know, it's crazy that you've got to book your private midwife as soon as you pee on a test, right? Like,
yeah, literally.
Otherwise they're booked out. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Amazing. So they were available for your due date, right?
Yes. Yeah. So they came over and we met kind of before, I guess, we agreed to go ahead. And then I emailed them. It was like a first date. I emailed afterwards saying, I loved meeting you, and it would be amazing if you'd be on this journey with me. And luckily they felt the same. So
nice.
Yeah. So we went ahead.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you know what's interesting is, again, the way you brought up into the world, it just it obviously creates your reality, right? So for you, your mum had a home birth, so that's an option to birth. Whereas other, I guess, kids that were born in a hospital from maybe parents who didn't have access to a home birth or didn't know about a home birth may not know that a home birth is an option, or may not consider it as a first-time mum, because I know that home birth as a first-time mum is scary. It's some women might think, maybe I need to see how my labor goes for the first one to then consider that for the second, because I don't know, maybe it's dangerous, or maybe maybe I'm not made for it, or maybe I can't do it without pain relief. But you obviously went straight away to home birth, which is really interesting. Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, and I did actually consider, in Launceston there's a birth centre that's opposite the hospital, and I did think about birthing there or investigating that option, because I felt a bit nervous. For some reason I was worried about postpartum hemorrhaging. I'm not really sure why that I fixated on that, but yeah, and then as soon as I met the midwives up here, I was like, we can do this. We can do this, the four of us. But I had a really awful experience actually with a doctor who I went to first get my blood test for pregnancy. My usual doctor was away. She's amazing, but he was a locum, and when I said I wanted a home birth, he basically said, don't do that. You can bleed out in 2 minutes and die. He kind of suggested he thought it should be illegal. And that was really awful. And to be honest, it made me even more motivated to have a home birth, because I knew that wasn't true. And he's probably seen no home births. And I literally was a home birth baby. Like, I was in the room as a baby. So, that was a really awful experience. And my normal doctor was really supportive and able to talk to me about the risks and make sure that I was comfortable with my decision.
Yeah, nice. And see, that's really interesting. The sometimes, the opinion of, other people, other professionals can really have a deep impact on your decision to home birth or not. And in your case, it made you wanting to have one really badly. But for other women, that might have been a deterrent, and they might have gone, he's a professional, he knows I could bleed out. Let's not do it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And I did leave thinking, gosh, if I make this choice, am I already, a bad mother? And we've got such a tendency to blame ourselves, I think, as women. So, it's a real shame. And I'm glad that I I could handle him, but I hope he's not sharing that with other women as well.
So, when you told your parents that you wanted to have a home birth, were they um, like super excited for you? Were they worried actually about you having a home birth?
Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, they were really excited. My parents, in particular, um, my dad's passed away, but my stepdad, he'd also kind of been in that world, and that didn't surprise him at all. My mum's a homeopath, or she was in a previous life,
Yeah.
so she was really excited to, prepare me and do all those things. And Dylan actually was from the outset really supportive of a home birth
Oh,
as well.
wow.
He did a bit of reading and thought, yeah, that's a great idea. His mum had a really fast labour, so she was excited, and also like, I think, yeah, both of his parents were like, oh my gosh, how far's the hospital away? Just in case you need it.
Yeah.
But they were also cool with it, which was great.
Nice. So, how far was the hospital actually from your place in case you needed to transfer?
It's about half an hour.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess 25 minutes with no
Yeah.
traffic, but yeah, about half an
Yeah.
hour.
Nice. So, what was the next step for you? So, you got in touch with a private midwife. You got, I guess, referrals and all of that. What was the next thing that happened for you?
So I had to also be registered with the hospital so that they could do all my referrals for ultrasounds and blood tests and that sort of thing throughout. And the midwife sort of guided me and helped me decide which ones I wanted to have. And I had pretty well everything standard.
Yeah.
So I had the 12-week scan. I did the
The
I
nib
think
test?
they test for Down syndrome. Yeah, is it NIPS? Yes,
Yeah,
that
I think
one.
it's called the
Yeah,
NIPT or the Harmony test.
that's the one. Yeah. I had that at 13 weeks.
Yeah.
I was quite anxious in pregnancy, and I think I thought, oh, as soon as I have this scan and as soon as I know this, then I'll be able to relax. But obviously, there's always the next scan to worry about.
Yeah.
But I had kind of all of those standard scans throughout. I was quite sick as well with morning sickness up until probably 18 weeks. And so I was just kind of managing that with, I don't know, throwing up, I guess. Eating crackers.
Wow.
Don't know that I was managing, but yeah. It was
Was,
okay. I think a lot of women have it a lot worse. So.
Oh, look. Was your mum trying to find remedies, things to help you? I'm guessing anything based with ginger could help, maybe?
Yeah. And I saw a naturopath as well. So they recommended like a ginger and mandarin tea. So Dylan did that, made that up for me. And he was basically on tea and food duty. I couldn't cook or anything because the smell was too much. And they also recommended B6, which I think helped. It's so hard to know what helps because you can't really compare it. But I think I probably tried everything. I had the C bands as well.
Oh yeah.
And I wore those, whether that was in my head or not. It seemed to help to have those acupuncture bands. Yeah.
Wow. You would have been happy to get out of this, at 16 to 18 weeks, get out of this, sickness world and actually start enjoying your pregnancy, I'm sure.
Yeah, we actually, because our family lives in New South Wales, so we caught the Spirit of Tasmania, the boat, up over Christmas. And the whole way there, I just vomited and, it was obviously quite a bumpy ride. And it was awful. On the way back, I knew that I must be feeling a bit better, and it kind of, it must have wrapped up about 16 weeks, and I started to feel good again.
I couldn't think of anything worse, to be honest, when you're sick in pregnancy.
I think I was like in the bar area just throwing up, and some kind staff member got the medic and they shuffled me into a cabin out of sight.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah. We got through.
Yeah, good. So your pregnancy was pretty low risk. How was that second and third trimester actually after you finished throwing up all the time?
Yeah. It was overall pretty good. I did at about 18 weeks develop SPD, symphysis pubis dysfunction, or
Hmm.
something similar to that,
Yeah.
which the physio diagnosed, which is essentially, I think, the pubic bone at the front where there's
Hmm.
some cartilage, maybe there's a gap that starts
Yeah.
separating a bit early due to the hormone relaxin.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so it's basically a shooting pain down the front and also
Hmm.
really sore hips.
Yeah.
So if I stepped sideways or kind of took big steps, it was really, really painful, like a shooting
Hmm.
pain.
Hmm.
So I had that for the remainder from about 18 weeks. Tried to manage that with chiro and physio. I'm sure it did help a bit, but yeah, it was tough. I definitely towards the end slowed down a lot, and the beach walks ended up being, half an hour to walk 100 meters and back or something. It wasn't fun.
Oh, look, it's hard towards the end of pregnancy. I think
Yeah,
everyone slows down regardless. So,
totally. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, our body probably make us slow down so that we kind of like we're
Yeah,
not exhausted, I guess, maybe for labor. There's this unconscious, like obviously, some
yeah,
people nest before they go
yeah,
into labor because, they feel like they need to get their space ready. And then other
yeah.
people, they've really slowed down probably as a energy conservation and they just
Mm,
and in hindsight, it's like, oh, I slowed down a few days before I went into labor, but at the time you don't know that, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
fascinating.
I think I did both. I wanted to be busy and nest, and my body just kind of wouldn't let me. And so there was a bit of practicing surrender there, perhaps.
Um, so how did you prepare for your birth? So I know you had your private midwife, and they probably helped you to like educate yourself and kind of know what was coming. Did you have any
Mm.
other birth education?
Yeah, so they recommended quite a few birth videos and
Hmm.
books. So we watched quite a few videos and documentaries. I also read Rhea Dempsey's book. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head.
Oh, the
Birth with
title
Confidence.
escapes me too. Yes, that's right. Yes, I was
That's
on
the one.
birth. I'm like, okay,
Yeah. And that was amazing.
yeah.
Both me and my husband read that, and I also sent it to my mum. We'd planned for her to be at the birth at that point.
Oh wow.
So she read it too. And that was such a good book. It was really, really powerful
Hmm.
for us. We also did an online course with the Positive Birth Company, which is a UK based hypnobirthing course.
Hmm.
And it's just a lot cheaper than the ones we have locally. And that was really helpful. There wasn't a lot of really new information, but it was
Hmm.
really nice to just have the practical strategies. So we practiced
Yeah.
massage and visualizations and did a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, throughout the whole pregnancy, I think just really trying to inform ourselves and write a birth plan and talk about what Dylan's role would be. Um,
Mm.
and our midwives obviously were incredible, and they came to our house for visits
Hmm.
monthly and then fortnightly and then weekly as it got closer, and we just learned so much from them, and they were
Hmm.
really hands-on, so that was great.
Yeah, and I think what's really great with a home birth is you know that you need your partner involved, so they straight away they prepare themselves to be your support person. Because even though
Mm,
you'll have your midwife during your home birth, they're not going to be there from the start. So you need your partner to help you, especially in the early
mm,
stages, and then
mm,
obviously continue to be there. And some home birth midwives, they're quite happy if they see that, the woman is laboring, nice and steady, and the partner is, obviously very involved. They're happy to just step back and obviously
mm,
keep an eye on everything, but just leave you
mm.
guys to do your thing. And that's really
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. We
Wow,
also did
nice.
a birthing outside of the hospital course, just a local one with, there's a doula and a paramedic couple. And so that was great. The doula, talked about the environment and the space and some positions, and the paramedic talked about kind of if things go wrong. Obviously we'd planned to have the midwives there, but in case, we sort of knew what we'd need to do if they didn't get there in time, or if something went wrong. And that was quite reassuring to have done that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, it's good to be prepared for anything, because you never know, especially when it's your first, you never know how long your labor is going to be. You could have what's called a precipitous birth, where you labor so quickly that baby's born before the midwife gets here. That happens. So it's good to be prepared. Yeah, good. So with your pubic symphysis pain that you had, how were the I guess weeks and days leading up to the birth, as you're getting bigger, you're probably a lot more tired. How was that in preparation for Labor Day?
Yeah, it was pretty tough towards the end, that pain. The best thing about it was I got nightly massages, really long massages every night on my hips, which helped a lot. It really, really helped. And by that point, I was not moving a lot, and I had been a bit disappointed in myself for kind of not being able to keep as active as I would have liked in pregnancy, because it was really quite painful. So it was just slow walks on the beach, and trying to keep, I was really conscious of trying to keep Bub in a good position, so we're not slouching backwards. And but just turning over in bed took hours to get left to right. Try and keep the tummy, as I'm sure every heavily pregnant woman knows. It was a journey, but I was okay, and I wasn't too nervous about the pain in labour, because I had heard other women say that they didn't notice it. So I kind of thought, I guess it'll just be what it'll be.
That's a good thing to go by. It will be what it will be. Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, at least it's good if you were not stressing about it. That's good, because we know that stress is not, it's not productive. It doesn't help. It doesn't. We still stress. That's a thing. But it's good if you're not thinking about it. You're just like, well, I'll see on the day. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only thing that I was sort of, the date was approaching, I had tried to tell myself, you'll go late, you're a first time mum, you'll be overdue. But, then in reality, coping with that is really difficult. And I went into labour only 2 days over my due date. But those 2 days were so long. I was like, what? I'm 40 weeks, let's go.
Wow. That's right. The reality of going past 40 weeks mentally is really hard, actually. I found the same, actually. It's just because you're just like, well, from about, for me, from about 37 weeks, I said, it could be any days.
Yes,
and
exactly.
then so from 37 weeks all the way to 40, there's 3 weeks that go by, and then any days after morning. 40, you're like, okay, today. Like I used to look at the date, right? So I'd say, today's the 21st. Yeah, 21st. That's a great day for birth, and it wouldn't happen.
Yeah. We did the same. We had a little family group betting kind of round about when baby would come, and as the early days went by, I was like, okay, my brother's not going to win this, and I'm not going to. I put my my bet on earlier than my due date, just being hopeful. Yeah, it's very funny.
So who won the bet, actually?
My brother's girlfriend, and nice. When I was pushing, which I guess we'll get to, it was just after midnight, and I had been watching the clock while I was pushing, being like, I've got to get in before midnight, because I can't remember who, had had their bets on the day earlier. But I was just like so determined to birth her the day before, but it was midnight in the end.
That's so funny. So, so what was the first sign of your labor beginning then?
It was about 3 a.m., 2:30, something like that, on the Friday morning, and I woke up, went to the loo, and I kind of thought, oh, that feels like something. The period pain feeling.
Yeah.
I had been having Braxton Hicks the last few weeks of pregnancy, so, I thought, oh, it could just be Braxton Hicks, but it felt different. And then, I went back to bed, and they sort of started about 10 minutes apart. Yeah, and they were enough to kind of keep me a little bit awake, but I could doze through them. I think I rolled over and whispered to Dylan, I think I'm in labour. Yeah, so that was the first sign.
Did you manage to get a little bit of sleep after that?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was an early start because I was so excited and nervous. But yeah, I think I did doze. And that was actually Dylan's last day of work that Friday. Well, it was supposed to be. And we were just laughing about how funny it would be if he, if I went into labour that day. And so he had to call in and say, can't come in. Charlie's in labour. So he didn't go to work, and we just hung out, and it was a long day. The midwives came around lunchtime to check on me, and they were still pretty far apart, and enough to kind of be hard to concentrate through them, but I was still talking and having a chat to them. So they just suggested keep moving, have a walk, call us later. So that's what we did. We tried to have a bit of a walk around the block and just bounce on the ball. Dylan got the pool sort of blown up so that it was ready when we needed it.
Yeah.
And it was all kind of exciting and relaxed at the same time. My mum was down in Tassie just around the corner, so she popped in, and Dylan's mum was here staying in a van in the backyard, so she was around just kind of helping get everything set up too.
Oh, good. So you had plenty of family and hands to, help you and support you in whatever ways you needed. That's great.
Yeah. And I do remember getting a bit, I don't know, exhausted or grumpy, and I watched some Brooklyn Nine-Nine on Netflix while I bounced on the ball, and that helped pass the time until dinner time. Good. It was a long day.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be. It sounds like you were in pre-labour for quite a while, actually.
Yeah. It was about 6 or 7 p.m, I think, when I called the midwives and said, I think I need your help. I think I need a bit more help. And so they came around after dinner.
So is that when things started to, I guess, ramp up in a way, 6 to 7 p.m?
I think so, yeah. The contractions had they were variable, but, 4 or 5 minutes apart. Yeah, at the time they felt intense, but later on they felt much more intense.
Wow.
And they were great. They came around and...
Yeah, so all day you had contractions that were like 5 to 10 minutes apart. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds exhausting, honestly.
It was a long few days. Yeah, I put the TENS machine on actually. I think before the midwives came around, which was mostly just helpful to have something to do and to time them and press that lovely boost button, which was it was definitely helpful. The TENS in early labour, it didn't do much for me later on, but they came over and they did some acupressure points and some massage and kind of they were very hands-on and at the same time very hands-off, and would just let me get on with it and offer some suggestions if we needed them for how to move and what to do, but otherwise they kind of just sat back and watched, I suppose.
Yeah. And so then what happened after? So your midwives got here, and they're helping you through this. How was that night? So the following night, how did that
Yeah.
go?
So it was all kind of seeming to be going really well. At one point, they suggested, that I think you're ready to jump in the pool, which was really exciting. I loved being in the birth pool. It was so comforting. And there was always someone ready to kind of press on my back if I needed it, or remind me to breathe through contractions. I did at that point start vomiting as well, and needing to go to the toilet. and I think we all sort of thought it was quite close then. And they had told us afterwards that, they'd expected a baby by morning. But we spent quite a few hours in the pool and then out of the pool, throwing up, back in the pool. And then about 3 a.m. they suggested to go and have a little lie down and see if I could get a little sleep. We were all pretty exhausted by then, so Dylan and I went and had a bit of a snooze, and I think I managed to doze between contractions. And then we got up an hour later, and they kind of said, well, it's looking like it's maybe things are slowing down, or it's not really progressing. What do you want to do? Here's some options. So they said, you can do nothing and we'll just carry on. That's totally fine. Or we can check you and see how dilated you are, and go from there. And I said, I think I'd like to know at this point where I'm at. So it had been 24 hours at that point from the first contraction. So the midwife checked me, and there was like a long silence. And I was really like, just tell me. And so she said, so you're about 3 centimeters. And my heart just sank. I was like, and I know it can change in an instant, but it felt really defeating, thinking, gosh, it feels like we've been working really hard and I'm only 3 centimeters. So at that point they said, so options from here are, continue doing what we're doing, don't need to do anything, or we can break your waters here and see what happens. If there's meconium in the waters, then we'll have to go to hospital, probably. But if there's not, we're all good, we can carry on. Or we can go to hospital and potentially break your waters there. And they'd been asking me at that point throughout the night, every now and then, if I had felt like I had back labour, or, where I was feeling it. And looking back, I definitely did have back labour, and it was definitely all in my back. But at the time, I couldn't quite articulate that. And I was like, well, I don't know. It's just, I've never had contractions before. This is labour, I guess. And so Dylan and I had a chat, and I decided that I would prefer to go to hospital. I just felt like if they'd broken my waters at home and then there was meconium, it would feel like an emergency. And I didn't want to go to hospital in a rush. I wanted to feel kind of in control of it. So, and at that point, we were so exhausted too. So I said, let's go to hospital and break the waters there. So, in the car, I rode with one of the midwives, and my husband drove behind us, and we talked about pain relief and what we might do when we got to hospital. And in the car, I sort of I'd been open to having some pain relief, particularly gas. That was something I was always open to. But I had pretty strongly not wanted an epidural. That was the plan going into birth, that I wanted to really avoid that. So then we got to hospital. It was about 5 a.m. then. So it was very quiet. I think I got straight in the bath when I got to hospital, and pretty straight away got on the gas. I was very, very grateful for the gas. I really enjoyed that. That really helped, just having something to breathe into and to focus on. And it hadn't felt like an urgent panic as well, because we had the bags packed just in case, and it felt okay to be there. And then so I was checked by a midwife there, the hospital midwife, and that was a really really uncomfortable, painful check, she was very rough. And it was just so different to my really gentle check that I'd had at home. And she said, yeah, you're about 3 centimetres. And then the doctor came in and basically they suggested that if I wanted to go back home, I could. And I was like, what? Like, I'm not going home. Like, I've been there for 24 hours and we're here now and, you know, I'm having a baby. So, and, you know, by then I just felt like, no, I need more help. I can't keep doing this. So, so we stayed and she broke my waters. Then just with a little, like a rose thorn tippy thing on her finger. But not much came out. There's a bit of a trickle, but it wasn't, you know, a huge gush. And then, yeah, basically just all day laboured in the bath, in the shower, with the gas. I spent a long time on the toilet with pillows behind me. So that felt like a good position. And Dylan sort of holding my hand, breathing through every single contraction with me, absolutely exhausted. I remember sitting on the toilet and I was breathing the wrong way with the gas. So I sort of would breathe and then I would blow into the gas rather than sucking the gas in because I was so tired. I couldn't, you know, I knew I had to do something with it, but I couldn't quite get my head around what. I was so out of it by then. And it was a very intense, the contractions were really intense at that point. And they felt quite regular. I have no idea what they were. And Dylan and I were like falling asleep between contractions on the toilet, you know, like we'd nod our head and feel our head falling and we'd wake up and I'd be like, okay, here we go again. Yeah, that's one of the strongest images in my mind of us. And our beautiful private midwife, one of them had been able to come to hospital, the other hadn't been able to come because of the COVID rules. And she was just feeding us melon, you know, while we're breathing through these contractions. It was just the funniest memory. Like it was really beautiful. Yeah, and then I had been offered by the doctor when I'd first come in an epidural, and the doctor had said, "Oh, you need to think about what you want to do if you're not progressing." And I was kind of like, yep, definitely, definitely want to progress. And I had said no to an epidural once or twice, and there was, the point where I said yes was I was up on the back of the bed, sort of knees on the bed, facing the end of the bed, vomiting. I did a lot of vomiting. And actually they put a fluid drip in me when I arrived just to rehydrate me because it had been such a long time. And I just remember feeling completely out of control at that point, like completely overwhelmed. I just needed, at the time I thought I just need this to stop. This is too much. So I said, let's get the epidural. The nurse had said, oh, he's next door. If you don't get it now, you know, it could be a long time before he can come back. It could be an hour or two. And whether, I don't know, that I guess maybe that was true and I guess it is convenient for them. But if I hadn't been offered, I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have said yes at that point. And I had said in my birth plan not to offer me, that I would ask if I wanted it. But, in the end, it was the right call for me. It's just, it was a shame that that's kind of how it came about. So, that was really hard for my private midwife and my husband with me saying I wanted the epi because they had, been asked by me to really prevent me from getting it. And even the anaesthetist sort of checked with them several times, does she really want this? And I was like, yes, yes, I really want this. Shut up, leave me alone, like give me the epidural. And my poor husband and the midwife were like, look, it looks like she does. And they were kind of saying to me, are you sure? Are you sure? And I was like, yes, just leave me alone. I probably swore at people. It wasn't my best self. The anaesthetist was amazing though. He was really, really great. He was so gentle and made sure I felt really as informed as I could in that moment at least. And he got it in first time. It was really quick and simple. It was obviously really uncomfortable, but I know that it can take a few tries and I know they can go wrong. And I was just so lucky that it was instant and super simple. So that was great.
Yes, that's good. Yes. Wow. Did you get instant relief from the epidural?
Pretty well. It was a pretty intense. Like, I remember lying on my back and they do the ice check to see if you can feel, and it was pretty well probably my waist or just under my boobs to almost my feet that was numb. Yeah, and my legs were really heavy. It was really hard to move them. So I was sort of on my back from that point, which wasn't part of the plan, but that's what it was. Yeah, that must have been maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So yeah, I had a bit of a rest and something to eat, which was really nice. Had a bit of maybe a snooze, although, you know, they tell you to rest and then there's people coming in to check you and, you know, change your fluids and stuff every 5 minutes, so it wasn't really a rest. But yeah, and that point was really tough for my husband, because I had, you know, obviously talked for 9 months about not wanting an epidural, and that his job was to protect me, I suppose, from that. And he felt like, you know, an absolute failure, which at the time I wasn't really sure why he was so upset, but since we've obviously talked about it, and that was really hard. It was really hard for him to reconcile, and he felt like he'd failed me, and and he kind of had that moment to himself. He took himself off to the bathroom and just had a breather, and then came back and was, you know, ready to support me, and he pushed it aside, which I was really grateful for, because I was kind of lying there being like, oh God, I've upset him, which is, you know, not helpful for anyone. So, and then I think I was checked again potentially, and things kind of slowed down at that point, even more. So the midwife suggested we get the symphysis drip, and the doctor suggested that too, to speed things up, and I was okay with that, but I wanted to start and stay on a really low dose. I wanted, you know, the least intervention I could. So that's kind of what I agreed to. And then this nurse he took over, he kept turning the drip up, which I didn't know about until afterwards. And yeah, he'd turn it up, and my heart rate and Bub's heart rate would sort of speed up. And he didn't obviously like the look of that, and he was concerned, and he will call the doctor and keep them up to date. And we didn't have a great experience with him. He kept sort of suggesting, oh, this one might have to come out the sunroof. You know, you might have to have a C-section. And, you know, at the time, I think by then I just sort of resigned myself to this care, and I was like, wow, okay, I guess I might end up with a C-section, which is not at all what I wanted. And they also at some point brought in the ultrasound and checked, and she was posterior. I didn't know that she was a she at the time, but yeah, the baby was posterior, which explains a lot. Yeah, she wasn't in the best position. She was slowly turning though, so she did turn, which was great. But yeah, she had been probably posterior for quite a while. And then I think they checked again, and I was really close. And yeah, eventually about 11 o'clock in the evening, I was ready to push, which was really, really exciting. At that point, I was like, cool, let's do something. And my epidural had sort of, I don't know if they had turned it off or it had worn off, but I could pick my legs up and I could move side to side, and I had a lot more feeling back, which was great. And I started to feel the contractions again pretty strongly. So yeah, I had another midwife shift change. So we had 3 different hospital midwives, and my amazing home birth midwife was here the whole time by our side. She was with us for like 30 hours in the end. She's just incredible.
Wow.
I don't know how she does it. We kept saying, go home, and she's like, no, I'm fine, I'm here. And I'm so grateful to her, because she just made the experience so, you know, she made sure that the little tea light candles were up, and she limited people being in the room, and, you know, she kind of held that space for us.
Yeah.
Which was great. Yeah, and then we started pushing on my side, which I wanted because I wanted to avoid being on my back. And then I'm not sure why they asked me to go on my back, so I moved on to my back, and it was about 45 minutes of pushing, which it felt so quick to me. And it was tough with the epidural because I couldn't really feel the contractions that well. I could definitely feel like a pain, I suppose, but I think that was probably, I guess, where her head was moving, or I didn't necessarily get the full wave of contractions. So I think sometimes I was pushing when there wasn't a contraction, and my private midwife knew. She was like, Charlotte, are you pushing now? Do you have a contraction? And I was like, yeah. And they'd be like, oh, no, I have one now. So I was like pushing back to back, which is not ideal, but we got there. Yeah, but I did enjoy that feeling of, trying to do something again and be in control a bit again. Obviously watching the clock to see who'd win the bet at the same time.
Of course,
but yeah, it was, looking back, I've got this video, about a 10-minute video of her being born, and I look very calm, and I'm not noisy or anything. I'm just sort of pushing and then breathing and go, oh, ouch. But at the time it felt really hard, but I looked quite calm, which was nice.
Wow. Good on you.
Yeah. And then she was born. She sort of, she came out at first with like her bottom lip still hooked inside me. And then the next push she kind of all came out all at once. And straight onto my chest, which was really lovely. And she took a couple of minutes she was breathing, like she was gurgling and stuff, but she didn't cry, which you see in the movies that the baby cries straight away, so I was a bit worried, and I just blew on her face. The midwife said, just blow on her face, and then she cried, and everyone sort of sighed a big sigh of relief. And and there she was on my chest with a huge cone head. Her head was just completely smushed, which they were like, don't worry. And I was like, yeah, I know, it's fine. But it was pretty intense. The photos looking back are hilarious. But, such a long head.
That's amazing, the way the head deforms.
It's amazing.
I guess is able to be modeled to fit through the pelvis and through the canal is amazing.
Yeah.
It is. We're just made for this. We're just made to birth.
So clever.
And it's so clever. Wow. How long was your labour altogether?
So it was about 45 or 46 hours from the first contraction to birth.
You did well. You did extremely well. Both, your husband, obviously, Dylan, and obviously your midwife, who was there for 30 hours.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Absolute champions. Like, it was, it was really intense. And, I had the hormones to help me. Obviously, I know I was doing the harder job, but for Dill, he was just, awake for 2 nights in a row with no sleep and no hormones to help him going. And the midwife was obviously working really hard. So we were just absolutely shattered. Yeah. Yeah, it was long.
Wow. And the hardest part is, after all of this labour, you obviously have your baby, but then it's not like you can have a restful night of sleep.
No, that's right. And even, I think one of the most surprising things was I birthed the placenta really quickly and easily. They gave me the shot in my leg. I hadn't wanted it, but they said, given that it's been such a long labour, the risk of hemorrhage, and I said, yeah, great, go for it. But afterwards, the hospital midwives were really keen to get us moved onto the ward and get all cleaned up. So we did have some skin-to-skin time, which was really nice. And then pretty quickly after that, they got me to have a shower, and they got Isla dressed, and I had said to Dylan just straight after the birth, like, go have a quick nap on the couch here. You know, I'm sure that'll be okay. I'm sure they're not going to kick us out of the birth suite immediately. But yeah, they really did, like, and they also like let me shower on my own, you know, immediately after birth, basically. With my epidural had obviously worn off then, and actually straight after birth I could move my legs and stuff completely. But I was a bit surprised, you know. I was like in the shower and the door was open because I was worried I might fall over or something, but it really didn't feel like we had a lot of care after birth. The midwife, our private midwife, left to go home, which was great. We were like, yes, you need to go sleep. Yes. And we had asked the hospital if if Dylan could stay, because, you know, he couldn't really drive home on 2 nights of no sleep. It was a half an hour drive. It's not really feasible. So we said, can we stay in this room for a few hours? And, you know, we're keen to leave first thing in the morning and get back home. And they said no. So I was moved to the ward with Isla, and Dylan took my dressing gown and slept in the car, in the car park.
Wow, really?
Which was awful. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and just, it was just so crap to be separated after such a big experience for, you know, anyone birthing. Yeah, and then for him to have this horrible couple of hours sleep in the car until he could come back in the next morning. Yeah, and so as soon as it was morning and there was a new nurse on, I think I had 20 minutes sleep that night. Like, it was probably 4 a.m. by the time we got to the ward, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I had called a nurse to help me swaddle Isla, and, you know, I had no idea what I was doing. Yeah, it was a rough night. I ended up bringing Isla into the bed with me, and a beautiful midwife came and gave us a warm blanket and put the bed rail up and, you know, showed me kind of how to sleep next to her. But yeah, we were, as soon as breakfast came around, I was like, okay, we need to go. We need to get out of here and be at home. And yeah, the poor midwives are so overrun at the hospital. They're so busy, and there was no real care available, which is not their fault. It's all, you know, totally a staffing issue, but it wasn't very pleasant.
No, that's right. So you were able to go home that next day?
Yeah, yep. So I think it was probably about 9 a.m. that next morning. We got our mums, the grandmas, to come and pick us up and drive home because we were obviously too tired. Which was lovely. That was a really nice time. I drove with my mum, and Dylan and his mum drove Isla. And the car seat was in the other car. So that was really nice to be able to debrief with my mum. She brought us some McDonald's and some coffee, and yeah, we got home. And I think being at home was the best thing for me, but if I had a hospital birth again, maybe it would have been nicer to stay a bit longer, to have a bit more support if it's available. But again, staffing means that it's not.
Yeah, that's right. How did you go with breastfeeding? Did you want to breastfeed Isla, or how did that go?
Yeah, I had really hoped I could. I had a breast reduction when I was in uni, so about 10 years ago, and I was worried that might affect breastfeeding, which it did, but I am still breastfeeding, which is great. So yeah, basically with a breast reduction, it can they can cut the milk ducts, and, you know, it can affect it. So I'm feeding from one breast now, which is going really well, and she's on almost 100% breast milk apart from at daycare, and she's on formula there, which works really well for us. And it was a rough start. She had a tongue and lip tie as well, which was revised just a week after birth, so she couldn't latch. And I thought I was doing something wrong. We didn't really know what was going on, but yeah, as soon as that got revised, she latched pretty well. So that first week was syringe feeding her expressed milk
Yeah.
and colostrum that I'd expressed,
Yeah.
which is, like syringe feeding's not a pleasant experience, but luckily it was only a week and it all worked out. Breastfeeding's hard.
Yeah, it's extremely hard, and I think it's hard to prepare for breastfeeding because obviously you don't know how baby's gonna latch. If you've never done it before, you're like, well, I don't even know what I'm doing. And I mean, obviously, it's important to read up and I guess understand how breastfeeding works, and the fact that, you know, if baby sucks, there's therefore demand, which increases your supply. But I find there's only so much prep you can do before, but then it's all based on baby. I find. I mean, obviously, it's good to learn the different holds, the different techniques to get baby to latch. But if baby's got a tongue or a lip tie, which you can't really prepare for until you've got baby in your arms, that's really hard. But it's, I guess, where the education is really important is probably maybe knowing what signs could be associated with a tongue or a lip tie, so therefore you can recognize them and say, oh, something's not right, because not all doctors or midwives are good at diagnosing, or not diagnosing, but recognizing a lip tie or a tongue tie. So if at least you say, look, I think she has this, then you can either say, look, can you refer me to someone who can treat it, or, you know, can you do anything about it? So, but it's not like we're obviously made to breastfeed, but it's a skill we learn. We're not born with it. And I think for some women, it's really straightforward. It's really easy. But I feel like it's for a majority, we have to learn, and baby has to learn as well. And it's a real learning curve, really, for everyone, and it's really difficult. And obviously, there's the sleep deprivation and exhaustion from labour and all of that.
That's right. And you're so right that the baby has to learn too. I think I just thought, you know, she'd know what she's doing, but she didn't. I think because of the ties, she didn't know how to open her mouth wide enough to get a good latch, and I didn't know how to help her. And luckily, you know, our private midwives, they were there every day for the first week after birth, helping us. And but she took a little while to get the hang of it. I think it was a good 8 weeks before I felt confident that, you know, we were feeding and it didn't hurt, and and then it started to be smooth. And now at 7 months, she's just started to do the boob acrobats. I'm trying to feed her and she's like trying to get her legs up over my head, and it's just chaos. I'm like, we had a good few months of calm, easy feeding.
It's good when they're a newborn. Like, I mean, it's difficult, but at least they don't move. And then as they get older, they pull your hair, like they put your hand, like their hand on your face. They're trying to get away.
They get teeth now.
That's a big one. That's a big one, the teeth.
It's chaos. Yeah. I love it though. I love the connection, and it forces me to sit down as well. You know, like it could be a busy day and I feel like I should do everything, but you have to stop and feed your baby, and that's really, it's lovely. It's really beautiful.
Did you find out straight away that you could only feed from one side?
So for the first few days, I was expressing from both. And my right side got a lot of lumps really quickly that were quite hard to move, and it wasn't producing much at all. So me and my midwives sort of had a chat, and they said, oh, you can just feed off one if you like, if this is too much work and not really worth it. So I sort of just decommissioned the right boob, just gradually stopped pumping on it, and if I squeeze it now, a little bit of milk comes out, but luckily it hasn't had any mastitis or any lumps or anything like that. And the other boob has just picked up the slack, which is amazing.
Wow.
And like I'm a little bit lopsided, but it's worth it.
And again, you know, the body is just amazing at what it does. It'll recognize, you know, Isla's needs, you know, the supply she needs, and it'll just create it from one side. It's amazing. It's
Amazing.
adapting so well to the fact that one
Yeah.
side is not able to produce as much, so therefore the other
Yeah.
side will just do all the work. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did some colostrum expressing before in the weeks before birth, and
Hmm.
yeah, looking back, one side I was able to get much more than the other side,
Mhm,
which
mhm.
is interesting. So yeah, clearly from then it had sort of set the path. Mm.
Yeah. And so how did you find the transition, in welcoming Isla into your family? How was that for you, mentally? How was that for Dylan as well? How was it?
It was huge.
Mm. Yeah.
It was really big, and I think in many ways, I think a lot of it probably was to do with how long labor was and how tired we were from the get
Mm.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't sleep well really up until recently, actually. She's not slept well, but she was pretty upset as a newborn and yeah, wanted to be held all the time, constantly, which I know is really normal. So that lack of sleep, and I'm sure other things, led to, for me, quite intense postpartum anxiety.
Mhm.
Um, I absolutely loved being a mum and adore her, but I was so worried something would happen to her.
Yeah.
Just like constantly panicked that she would die, she would stop breathing, or she would
Yeah.
suffocate, or particularly I think all of the really important like SIDS advice and everything. I was just so obsessed with following it all and doing everything right.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, and those intrusive thoughts were really, really vivid. Like I would imagine in really great detail exactly how she would die, or
Mhm.
something would happen to her, and
Mhm.
I'd have that panic feeling, which was really, really tough. So I went to the doctor. My mum suggested a couple of weeks down the track and started some medication.
Mhm.
And that has really helped. And I'm still on a dose now. I managed to be on the lowest dose. That and that's been really effective at just taking that edge off. The
Yeah.
kind of, I don't have those vivid, panicky, visions anymore of something bad happening. I still worry a lot, and I've always
Yeah.
been a worrier.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's not so intense.
Wow. And thank you for sharing that, because I find it so important to share about, postpartum anxiety, about mental health in general, after having a baby,
Mm.
because in as much as you prepare for, baby's arrival, you conceived Isla, you wanted to have a child. It doesn't mean postpartum will be an easy ride, and
Mm.
it's really, I love sharing those conversations where we openly talk about mental health, and we openly talk about, the exhaustion, and we talk about how difficult it is when you're learning
Mm.
everything from scratch. You don't know what you're doing,
Yeah.
and you're learning
Yeah.
everything is new, and obviously it's new for baby as well. It's new for you. It's new for Dylan,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
and it's great to hear that, you obviously, it's not great to hear that you were not doing well. No, that's not what I meant.
Mm.
But it's, I think what's really important
Mm.
is to be able to share how you felt, and
Mm.
I think that will help a lot of other women to feel like they're not the only ones, because I think sometimes it can be
Yeah.
really lonely. Like you think, I'm the only one
Yeah.
that's ever felt that, and I'm the only one that's got those
Yeah.
thoughts, and I'm the only one that feels that,
Yeah.
but you're probably
Yeah.
not. And
Yeah.
I mean, in your case, it's great because you had, obviously, your mom was there to,
Mm.
guide you and tell you to go see a doctor, and therefore, you could get onto
Mm.
medication really quickly, which,
Mm.
as you said, really helped. So that's amazing.
Mm.
But for some women, I know that it's something they don't recognize, because
Yeah.
when it's your reality, you don't know that
Mm.
it's not the norm. You don't know that not everyone
Yeah.
feels that. So it can be hard to
Yeah.
recognize that this could be worth talking to the maybe a psychologist if you see one, or the GP, or your midwife if you've got your midwife in the first 6 weeks coming to see you. Sometimes it can be hard to recognize that this is not the norm. So thank you for sharing that. That's really amazing.
Oh, I agree. I think it's so important. And since sort of talking about it, I've realized other people that had babies before me who I just assumed were doing really well, and they must have been all over this mothering business, and since finding out that they also really struggled in the early days and found it really hard it was so surprising. I thought, I just thought everyone was coping and I somehow couldn't. But there is kind of a lot of support, and even my child health nurse, like our public health nurse, she's been great throughout the whole last few months with Isla's sleep as well, and just realizing there's almost always a next step of referral. There's almost always something else to try. We ended up going to sleep school in Melbourne, and have had a lot of support from the public system, which has also obviously helped my mental health a lot, having better sleep. So there is always something, I think, but you have to ask. Unfortunately, you have to push for it.
That's right. And I think the hardest bit is, so if you do have continuity of care like you did, at least you've got someone to talk to for 6 weeks. You've got your midwife, and you can say, usually by that point, your midwife pretty well. So you can kind of say, this is what I feel. This is how, this is how it's going. And then usually they're pretty good at referring and telling you who to see and so on. If you don't have that, it can be really hard because you only see the GP for maybe needles. That's the only time. And we know that GPs are really time poor. They don't really have time, which is really unfortunate. And I mean, there's only so much you can cover in a 10-minute session, 5 to 10 minutes. So
that's right.
And sometimes if you don't know that you can ask your doctor for a referral, or you can tell them that this is how you feel, this is what's happening, and then they can refer you. If you don't know that, you're not going to ask because you don't know what you don't know. But what's really good is there is a lot of support for parents with babies, with toddlers. There's a lot of help, but the biggest problem is you've got to seek that help. So you've got to go to see the child health nurse. You've got to go see the GP, and you've got to formulate what you want, which can be difficult sometimes. So I think with, for example, with you sharing your thoughts, that will probably maybe help someone to identify that maybe they're having the same thoughts, and then therefore that can help to trigger the start of a conversation about that, and trigger a referral for the GP to then talk about this, to then get referral to a mental health specialist, or get onto medication, whatever helps. So
and for partners as well, like that's so tough, either supporting a new mum who's got mental health challenges or just having your own. I think for Dylan that was really hard to see me struggling and not feel like he could help. Even like, he wanted to help by taking Isla overnight so I could get her sleep, but she wouldn't settle for him either. So I think like dad mental health is a real something that we don't talk about either.
No, that's right. We don't talk about mental health as a society in general, let alone dad's mental health or partner's mental health in general, because, well, they're not the ones that have given birth, so but they matter. Like, obviously the partner is super important in baby's life, and obviously their mental health is so important too, just because they haven't got the drop in hormones like we experience. It doesn't mean that they're not going to experience baby blues is a thing for dads and partners, yet we don't talk about it. And obviously the sleep deprivation plays a huge part in mental health. Your mental health going down. So obviously it can affect the dad or the partner who is also not sleeping at night.
Yeah, 100%.
So I guess to maybe to finish off, I'd like to ask how everything is going for you guys now. So Isla is 7 months. How is your
Yeah.
mental health? How is Dylan's mental health, as much as you can tell? And yeah,
Mm.
how's everything going for you guys?
It's going well. It's looking back, it feels it feels like we've come so far,
Yeah,
all three of us. And it's amazing to look back and go, wow, I don't know
yeah,
how we survived with such little sleep, and and that was really, really tough. And
yeah,
now we are, yeah, we're getting a rhythm and we're getting decent sleep. Still up once or twice a night, which is fine. Um, my mental health has improved a lot. I'm still seeing a psychologist regularly,
yeah.
which is really great. And yeah, and Dylan's doing really well as well, which is lovely.
Amazing.
And Isla's just a gem. She's fun and funny and silly and happy, and she's a great baby. She's my favorite baby. So
Of
yeah, no,
course.
we're going well. Yeah, and I think actually time has really helped with the processing birth and
Yeah.
processing like a disappointment or a sense of failure that I didn't
Hmm.
have the birth that I had hoped for, and
Yeah.
trying to reconcile that I had the birth that we needed to have,
Mm. Yeah.
and maybe next time I'll have a home birth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the birth you had is the birth you were probably meant to have. In as much
Mm,
as you didn't know about that, obviously. But
yeah,
it was the right thing for you, for Isla, for Dylan. It just might not have
yeah,
seemed like it was, but yeah. And
yeah,
you did
yeah,
everything you
that's
could. I
right.
mean, you held off
Mm.
getting an epidural for like 30 hours. That's insane. Like that's a lot of holding back and going, no, I'm not getting an epidural. When
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
it's
sure a lot
true.
of people in your situation would have jumped at it. I would have, certainly.
And maybe I
Um,
should have as well, like it's given me a lot of perspective, or I
yeah,
guess understanding of why people make the choices they make, or
yeah,
and this idea that something is black and white, like an
yeah,
epidural is bad, and
yeah,
natural physiological birth is good. Like no, it's complicated, and your
yeah,
needs change, and yeah, trying to go with the flow and be open to what you need at the time, but still being true to your values. It's really hard, but
yeah, of course.
it's nuanced, and
Yeah,
yeah, nothing's black and white.
yeah, and the idea of a birth plan is you kind of write what you'd like, what your preferences are, but you're still
Mm,
open to birth. Obviously, birth
mm,
is unpredictable, so you're still open to options in case things take a certain path, which in your case was baby was posterior and you had a really long labor. So that obviously
mm,
changes things because having
mm,
a short labor or labor that's 10 hours is different to having a labor that's
mm.
46 hours with a baby that's
Yeah,
posterior, and therefore the dilation is not
yeah,
as quick. So um,
yeah,
yes, and that's the beauty of what you did, because you prepared for birth, you prepared for a lot of scenarios, you had a lot of conversations with your midwives, and with
mm,
Dylan, obviously you informed yourself, so you kind of knew you knew what
mm,
an epidural was, obviously, and you knew why you didn't want it. But
mm.
then, as you said, in the car to hospital, you were getting open, a bit more open to the idea of pain relief, because you
Yeah,
knew that would be beneficial for you.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Did
Mm.
you do a birth debrief, maybe with your midwife or?
We kind of talked about it in their visits post birth.
Yeah,
It's all such a blur that first 6 weeks, so
yeah,
I don't really know what we talked about, but I've
yes,
talked about it a lot since then with
yeah,
Dylan and um, yeah, with whoever's interested, and
yes,
that has helped
yeah,
process it all, and that's been really, really important
yeah,
to um, yeah, to be able to look at it and forgive myself, because I was quite hard on myself afterwards about it, particularly with getting the epidural and going to hospital. And I think now I feel like I have really processed it, and yeah, even just looking at photos and videos of birth, and that's been really helpful.
Good. Yeah, and it is really important to talk about your birth, and then I guess, as you said, forgive yourself for how it went, because you did the best you could with what you had. And there's only so much you can do when you haven't slept for 2 days, and literally it's like you've ran 17 marathons in 46 hours. There's only so much you can do humanly to survive. So
100%. Yeah,
I still can't get over how long your labour was. That's insane.
That's wild. And, 12 hours is a long time, or 15 hours.
Yeah, so it's 46.
We got through.
But you did. Are you a bit apprehensive about having potentially baby 2 and your labour being long as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I imagine having another baby, my automatic, I'm imagining being in hospital, but that's not actually what I think I want and what I'll choose to do. But I think because that's my only experience now of birth, that's kind of my default of birth. So I think I will be nervous if I get pregnant, if or when, hopefully one day I get pregnant again. And we'll need to work through that at the time. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, just to, rebuild that self-confidence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What an incredible story, Charlotte. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you.
What a wild ride it would have been for you. I can't even imagine. You've done incredibly well to make it through a 46-hour labour. I'm in awe of it. Wow. It's amazing. What you and Dylan have done is amazing, obviously. Wow.
She's worth it.
Yeah,
she's cute.
That's right.